wheat farms in the U.S. right now. In fact, USDA says the number of wheat farms in the country has declined by more than 40% in the last 20 years.
In just 3 months, $240 million in U.S. wheat contracts vanished when the Philippines abruptly canceled its order, setting off a chain reaction from Manila to Marseilles. In one growing season, U.S. wheat export revenue has plunged 38%, the steepest drop since World War II, despite U.S. wheat still being up to $10 per ton cheaper than rivals. A century of trust is gone overnight, and Canada is stepping in fast. Grain ships now dock in Vancouver instead of Seattle, while North Dakota's fields watch cash flow shift north to Saskatchewan. Why is the world paying more to avoid U.S. wheat? Is this the death knell for an agricultural empire? In just 72 hours at the end of May, Manila canceled 65,000 tons of prepaid U.S. wheat and instantly signed for 110,000 tons from Australia, wiping out nearly $17 million in expected U.S. sales and pushing total lost contracts to $240 million for 2024 to 25. Asia's first slap at America's iconic grain. And the hits kept coming. USDA data shows total wheat cancellations outstripped new sales by 128,800 tons in late May, a net negative not seen in decades, choking off cash flow for Kansas and North Dakota farmers who need exports to pay loans, buy seed, and fertilizer. Since April, a plan to levy up to $1.5 million per voyage on China-linked ships has pushed carriers to avoid U.S. ports. Asian importers now charter non-Chinese ships, driving freight rates up. A Singapore shipper said, "Right now, nobody dares book U.S. wheat. Too risky." By June, the Baltic Fritos Index for the Asia U.S. West Coast route jumped 9% to $5,994 per 40-foot unit. If it hits the projected $8,000, the landed price of U.S. wheat in Manila will be 12% higher per ton than Russian or Canadian grain, erasing America's cheap advantage. In Seoul, customs data shows U.S. horse feed wheat imports collapsing from 121,000 tons in 2021 to 22 to just 2,000 tons in 2023 to 24. Market share fell from 5% to near zero, while Canada took over the high-protein niche, shipping over 200,000 tons and cornering 60% of premium bread loaf orders because Korean ramen chains demand consistent quality. A deeper reason, glyphosate residue fears. Tests by the Environmental Working Group found U.S. wheat products with up to 1,150 parts per billion, far above its 160 ppb safety guideline. Canada's own agency found only 1.3% of samples exceeded the limit, so Canadian wheat looks cleaner to Korean buyers. So Asian millers now pay $15 more per ton to avoid U.S. wheat, seen as a health risk. These two markets alone once bought over 4 million tons a year. Now they're moving on. For the Philippines, the U.S. not only lost 38% of wheat revenue in one quarter, but let Canada, Australia, and Russia grab long-term deals. For South Korea, the blow stings deeper. America's once unshakable supply chain reputation now ranks behind Australia and Canada for Korean flour millers. And this is just the start. When the new port fees hit on October 14th and the EU slaps carbon tariffs on glyphosate-laced grain, each U.S. wheat ship to Asia will cost hundreds of thousands more. If Washington doesn't adapt fast, the shock from Manila and Seoul could mark the end of a century of U.S. wheat dominance. Europe, once U.S. wheat stronghold, flipped too. A fresh trade report shows Canadian grain imports into the EU up 65% in January alone. An extra $179 million, mainly hard and milling wheat for France and Italy's bread and pasta industries. Meanwhile, U.S. orders, though cheaper, have shrunk so much they're no longer even listed separately. As one French customs official at Rouen port said in May, red maple leaf ships docked one after another. The milling firm Grand Moulin Dairy said, "We signed long-term with Saskatchewan. Its carbon footprint is 18% lower than U.S. wheat and delivery risk is lower." That's not just talk. The EU's carbon border tax kicks in by late 2026, and millers are moving early to dodge a $22 per ton surcharge, according to finance ministry drafts. In Italy, the pushback is even fiercer. With pasta prices running double the inflation rate, Rome held an emergency food security meeting and gave pasta makers the green light to ditch U.S. durum for Canadian and, for the first time, Turkish supplies. Bureau says it set up a private lab in Saskatchewan to test for Michelin-grade protein before loading, guaranteeing cargoes reach Parma before the rollers stop. Market numbers show the shift. A late May Sask wheat report shows Canadian exports at 17.4 million tons after 41 weeks, up 2% year-on-year, despite tough prairie weather. FIB Vancouver has surged to $298 per ton, far above U.S. hard red winter at $244 at the Gulf. That $54 gap is seen by European buyers as a safety premium. So is France and Italy's turn away just a blip, or the end of America's century-long grain reign? Watch what happens when CBAM kicks in and the EU tightens glyphosate limits by late 2025. If Washington doesn't clean up wheat's image, United States may vanish from baguettes and spaghetti plates across Europe. Mexico just landed another punch Kansas farmers didn't see coming. Since early 2025, U.S. wheat trains have jammed at Laredo. Thousands of tons sit under tarps, while customs officers tackle a tariff schedule that changes almost monthly. A border broker told Reuters that in late March alone, over 600 grain wagons sat frozen, pushing clearance from 36 to over 120 hours and adding nearly $12 per ton in storage fees. Meanwhile, Mexico's extended anti-inflation decree keeps tariffs at 0% for everyone, except the U.S. The result: Canadian wheat unloaded at Veracruz and Manzanillo jumped to 312,000 tons in Q1, up 37% year-on-year. Why are Mexican millers from Grupo Bimbo to Harinera Anahuac paying $15 more per ton for Canada's grain? First, they're fed up with America's border roulette. Since March 4th, every U.S. shipment must refile its HS code, wait for a ruling, then get a control number, what Dentons calls paperwork on top of paperwork. Canada's delivery speed became a lethal edge. CPKC and CN Rail promise to close the Vancouver-Veracruz loop in under 12 days, at least 3 days faster than Minneapolis-Eagle Pass. The second edge is trust. While the U.S. wrestles with glyphosate, Canada goes premium. Every prairie wheat lot now carries a blockchain QR code tracing its trip from Saskatchewan farm to Vancouver's automated cold store. An importer can scan it for moisture, protein, even fumigation data. Canada also plays the environmental card. Its sustainability report puts wheat's carbon footprint at 343 to 600 kilograms CO2 per ton. With soil carbon factored in, it drops to 279 to 300 kilograms, about 18% lower than the U.S. minimum. For Mexico, which collects carbon taxes from flour mills, Canada's low-carbon wheat is a VIP pass. Finally, the price is still right because Canada picked the right fight. After the U.S. slapped a 25% tariff on Mexican and Canadian imports, U.S. farmers couldn't slash prices to win buyers back. A weaker Canadian dollar, at 68 cents U.S. in April, keeps FOB Vancouver only $7 per ton above Gulf values, despite the longer haul. Put it all together: snarled customs, tech transparency, and a carbon edge, and Mexico has laid out a feast for Canada. Trading Economics shows Mexico's Canadian wheat imports were $178.5 million in 2024. In just 3 months of 2025, they're already near $90 million, doubling last year's pace. Meanwhile, U.S. sales fell 28% in Q1, per the USDA's March grain outlook. The lesson is clear. In today's turbulent world, low prices aren't enough. Agri-supply chains now prize consistency, traceability, and sustainability far more. Mexico, once a loyal U.S. wheat buyer, just proved it. If Washington doesn't rebuild trust fast, the exits by the Philippines, South Korea, France, and Italy will just be the prologue to a long obituary for America's wheat dominance. The problem isn't falling prices. It's that the Made in USA label is losing its value. Reuters reports U.S. wheat acreage shrinking, while Canada expands planting from 2024. In just 18 months, diverted orders have cracked America's century-old monopoly. The U.S. brand now means late deliveries, extra tariffs, and glyphosate residue. A toxic mix farm media exposed weekly. This credibility crisis spreads fast. Today wheat, tomorrow soy, corn, even beef. Reuters warns $191 billion in U.S. farm exports could face domino retaliation. Soy and corn are next if the White House doesn't dial back tariff fights with Canada and Mexico. Winning back trust is 100 times harder than cutting prices. North of the border, Ottawa is backing blockchain traceability and lower carbon footprints, feeding buyers' demand for transparency and sustainability. If Washington keeps swinging tariffs, another 18 months, and the grain leaderboard could read Canada, Australia, Russia, with no Kansas or North Dakota in sight. This was just the beginning. Hit that subscribe button and buckle up. Digital Garage has so much more in store.